It saddens me that many are probably either A, going to skip this episode, or B, they're just gonna hate on it because it's just, quote unquote, a filler episode, which upsets me because honestly, as a fan of My Hero Academia, and someone that has seen a lot of filler, this was a really good episode. I think we can add something new to the list of the funniest things that All Might has ever done in the My Hero Academia series. That moment when the email's like, the email is here! The email is here! Like, I was dying. When that popped up, I'm like, All Might, never change. I love you, man. I love your notifications and all of that. It's always just made me laugh every time I see something like that pop up. And just seeing, like, your email is here, or a new email is here, I just started busting a gut. But okay, so just to clarify a couple of things, this episode of My Hero Academia is indeed a filler. I mean, it's pretty obvious. The episode didn't really even try to hide that. I mean, it starts off with All Might and Izuku sitting at, like, a table. They're talking like, whoa, what's going on here? Why are we not, in the middle of the exam? And, it was just a very self-aware intro sequence for the episode. So, I mean, if you weren't already aware of this being a filler episode, you definitely knew it was as soon as the episode opened up, right before the opening started. So, at that moment, many that did not know this was going to be a filler probably got a little bit upset with the episode. Like, they're probably like, oh, okay, skipping. Or they probably clicked in the middle of the episode just to see if there was any content that continued on the events from the previous episode, and they realized it probably didn't, so they're like, you know what, not gonna watch the episode, I'll wait till next week. I know there's many like that, because I want to be honest, I am someone that has done that in the past as well. When I used to watch Naruto weekly, when it was coming out, or, Bleach, I remember skipping filler episodes. I didn't want to deal with it. I was like, I'm not dealing with this. I want to see, the actual story, and I skipped filler. That's how I was. I just didn't care about it. And I understand why many would want to skip this episode. However, there is some things that happen within this episode that is very relevant. Actually, the entirety of this episode is very relevant. And the reason why I say that is because it is considered canon, even though it is technically filler because it's not in the manga, and obviously the timing for this could be a bit better, it still is technically canon, because the events of this episode ties in with the movie that came out very recently. Personally, I have yet to go see it. I want to see the movie. I'm waiting for it to come out, and I'm probably gonna have to wait until it comes out on Blu-ray or whatever, because usually theaters that air anime are nowhere near me, so I have to wait until it finally comes out before I can watch it, or unless it's on some, a major streaming site, for instance, Funimation or Crunchyroll or something, but that's probably not gonna happen, so I'm probably gonna have to wait until the BD DVDs come out until I can actually watch it, so it's a pretty far ways off. But anyways, this is canon. This episode is canon. The movie is canon. So before you write this episode off thinking it's trash, it really isn't. Now, there is some things about this episode that I think could have been handled a little bit better if given more time, but in reality, for what it tried to set out to do, I think it did a decent job. Now, let's get right into it, okay? The reason why this filler episode had to happen in the first place is because there is a charity event. There is an event going on in Japan. It's about charity and stuff, and either A, My Hero Academia had to go on break this week. That means we would have gotten no episode, like nothing at all, and we would have had to wait until next week just to have any new content in My Hero Academia, or we got a filler episode. And so in this case, Studio Bones, they decided to say, you know what, I know that it's not continuing the content of, what's going on in the story, but we can go along with the events of a charity event, progress the story in its own way because it ties in with the movie, but also go along with the charity event about love and stuff. So I think that Studio Bones did the best thing they possibly could in this moment, and I'm pretty happy with that, because this allows more episodes to be added to the total episode count. For instance, with this episode airing and being considered filler, that means there's less episodes for actual canon content. Now, I know normally that's a bad thing. It is, kind of, usually. But in this case, the reason why we want more filler episodes, at the very least for this final part of Season 3, is because they're wanting to end it at a proper, section. If they carry on too far, it's not going to end at a proper place, and it's just going to be a disaster, because we don't really know when Season 4 is going to come out. We know it's going to come out. It's kind of common sense. I mean, they have 2 songs in the new soundtrack that released that is literally titled after 2 characters that will be introduced in the next arc. So you don't just make, original soundtracks with character names if they're not going to be relevant and if they're not going to be used. So, it's common sense, okay? But the point is that this episode, it is canon. It could have been better paced or whatever in terms of timing, but, that's just how events are. They come out of nowhere, but yeah. Okay, so with all the groundwork being stated, everybody now on the same page on why this episode's here, or the filler, if it's canon, it's a good, or whatever. I personally believe that this is a pretty freaking good filler episode, even though it is canon. It's really good, and I saw what you did there. I see what you did there, Studio Bones, and it's very clear what, like, the writing of this episode, what they were implying with what happened, like, the core theme of love and how Midnight was, like, portrayed as a character in the story that was in love with the villain, which aka All Might, but then All Might sacrificed himself, like, to, die because he didn't want Midnight to be charged with anything because obviously Midnight knew that All Might was a villain. That's the general plot of the story, FYI, of this episode. But basically, Midnight, knew everything, and All Might didn't want that to go out in public eye, police to find out about it, so he ended himself for Midnight would be fine. The concept of the story, honestly, is very dark. It's a very dark middle section of the episode. I was very surprised with the theme of this episode, because honestly, I'm not gonna go into spoilers or anything, but what happened within this episode is very similar to something that happens later on. Manga readers, you know what I'm talking about. If you look at the concept of this episode and what happened, it is very similar to something that happens in the future, and I was actually pretty blown away by that. I was like, this is obviously intentional. They obviously are designing this episode similar to something that happens. I'm like, I guess they're wanting to build up something, and it would make sense if this is canon and it's building up for something in the future. It makes sense why it would happen like this. So I appreciate that. It's very subtle, and I think only the manga readers are really going to get to appreciate the full scope of what this episode really had going on in it. But also, there is something that happened within this episode that made me chuckle a little bit, because there was something that was correlated to the manga that just came out literally the other day. Now, this is not a spoiler, so it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, and I think if, you see the chapter finally get animated, you're really not going to understand what makes it so funny in that moment compared to this episode. So, I want to talk about it. Like I said, it's no spoilers, you don't have to worry, don't freak out. But in the latest chapter, you have a scene to where Midnight and All Might, they're walking side by side up the stairs, and you see to where, like, oh, are there a couple and all that? And Midnight's like, no, I don't date older guys. I don't go out with older guys. And within this episode, technically, Midnight and All Might were kind of like in a relationship. And I find that funny. I don't know, just the way those two things correlate together. It's very obvious that Horikoshi put that Midnight All Might scene in the chapter to go along with this week's episode, with finding out who, how old All Might really is, to also just Midnight and All Might's relationship. I thought it was incredibly funny. Speaking of which, All Might's age is kind of a mystery when you think about it, because Cementos, he's like, I am a big fan of All Might. I watched him when I was a kid, and as soon as this man, that's obviously a grown man, a teacher, says something like that, you're like, how old is All Might? Like, how old is that man for Cementos to, say something like that? You're like, okay, that's kind of bizarre. So, there's a lot of great moments throughout this episode. I mean, I especially love how All Might just ran and all that, and he was actually alive the entire time. That was a great bait and switch. I was pretty surprised about that, and I guess with that moment, it kind of got rid of all the dark tone that the episode was carrying, because if it wasn't for, technically, the fake villain All Might running out like that, it would have been a very dark ending for the story, and so I guess they didn't want to leave it like that, leave it on a dark ending. They wanted to have something kind of uplifting or funny, or just break the tension, and so All Might still technically being alive and running away kind of cleared that up. Now, let's talk about one scene that personally I think could have been done a little bit better. Now, even though this is canon, and this does tie in with the movie, and I personally enjoy this episode, there is one thing I do have a problem with when it comes to this episode, and that is the fact that Izuku realizing what is really going on was too simple. I felt like he just got his answers too quickly. Like, normally in, like, a detective series, there's a lot of build-up for it. You get, kind of understand what's going on. You might have a good grasp on what's happening before it's finally mentioned by the MC to kind of clarify everything. Well, that didn't technically happen in this episode. The conclusion that Izuku reached was kind of rushed. There could have been more time spent for Izuku to get to that proper conclusion. I mean, it was done pretty well for the time frame they had for this episode, but there definitely needed to be a little bit more time to the conclusion that Izuku reached, and I feel like it was a little bit rushed on that part, but overall, it was a pretty decent freaking episode for what it tried to do. But yeah, it's a pretty simple episode this week. It really is, but it's still a fun episode. I really cannot wait to watch the movie of My Hero Academia, because seeing how Dave is All Might's sidekick from the past actually has me very interested. I didn't know about that, honestly, because remember, I haven't watched the movie, and I have not spoiled myself. I only know slight things about it. I don't know much. The only thing I really know about the movie is the stuff I covered in my movie discussions, talking about the trailer. So, honestly, I had no idea that, David was a sidekick to All Might. I knew he was, someone that potentially made gadgets and stuff for All Might, but that's all I really knew. So, seeing how this dude was All Might's sidekick at one point has got my interest, because knowing what I know as a manga reader from what happens in the future, and then seeing how All Might had a, sidekick David, and then knowing everything that happens, I'm just like, I really like how that was done. Like, that really might add a little bit more weight to some events in the next season. I think this was probably the best movie, or time to release the movie for the story, especially for the next season before it actually is animated. But that's about it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Did you enjoy this episode? Did you hate this episode? Be honest. And with that, I love you guys. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe. If you like this video, please leave a like. And if you want to get notified for whenever I upload a video, please click the bell icon down below. And with that, Chibi out.